Good evening. Thank you all for coming out tonight, and thank you all for tuning in. Tonight's program is Healing Together After Tragedy. There's no right way and no wrong way to deal with tragedy, but there are healthy ways and there are unhealthy ways. Tonight is not about answers. Tonight is about understanding our emotions. It's about recognizing the healing process. And it's about learning how to present ourselves in such a way that it's a healthy environment for ourselves and for those around us. On behalf of the Sephardic Bikur Holim, and on behalf of our entire community, I want to thank our very own MHR crisis team, specifically Rochelle, Audrey, Sonia, who have been unbelievable in always addressing the needs of our community in times of crisis, always being first at the scene, and always dealing so professionally under the roughest of circumstances. Thank you for always putting everybody else ahead of yourselves. I also want to recognize and thank High Lifeline, an unbelievable organization and a great partner in helping us from day one in dealing with the crisis and responding in addressing the needs of our community and of the greater community at large, and for their professionalism and experience in dealing with these types of events. It's my distinguished pleasure to introduce two spectacular speakers tonight. The first is Dr. David Pelcovitz, who's a professor of psychology and education at the Israeli College of Yeshiva University, who will talk to us about coping and healing. And following him will be Rabbi Raymond Beyda, a great community rabbi, a personal friend, dynamic speaker, who will give us words of wisdom and words of hizuk. Thank you again.
I was just thinking about an experience I had a number of years ago where a colleague showed me the picture of a man who was stuck in the stairwell of the World Trade Center on 9/11 and thought that his life was over. He was able to show me what does this man's brain look like when he's having a flashback to the worst moment of his life. And when he showed it to me, the first thing that became very apparent was the language centers of the brain were shut down. Literally, he was rendered speechless. And then over time, over a long period of time, as my colleague helped this man find words and find meaning in the experience, that's when some measure of nechama started to come. As we stand here tonight, we all know that we're all beyond words. There are no words, especially given the fact that it's beyond understanding how one community can have this kind of horrific loss about 2.5 years after a very similar loss happened in this community, very often with classmates and friends. And what I've been hearing over and over again from the people who are members of this community is a sense of numbness, a sense of being beyond words. When Aaron heard about the sudden tragic loss of his 2 sons, the word is Vayidom Aaron. The Barbanel explains why that choice of words. Why not say Vayishkod Aaron? The obvious word would have been Sheket. But he explains that the word Demimut in Hebrew is for when you're literally beyond words. You can't find the words. What I'm going to do in the half hour or so that I'll be speaking before you hear from Rabbi Beyda, who's going to have much more wisdom and depth than I possibly could have, is I'm just going to share with you some practical kinds of approaches in terms of thinking about this, coping with this in terms of you yourselves, because the adults here are as numb as the children. And then I'll break down some approaches with the different ages of your children, and then later on, after Rabbi Beyda's talk, we'll have time for questions with Rabbi Beyda, myself, and Sahava Farban from Chai Lifeline, who probably has more experience with this than just about anybody I know, and is a very esteemed colleague. So let me just start with a couple of thoughts. Number one is, I'm looking at something called expert consensus guidelines. They pull together the world's leading experts on just this kind of thing. And they ask them, what works best? And these are hundreds of people from around the world. And pretty much it's probably what you've been hearing since the horrible tragedy. But I'll review it with you because there's collected wisdom here. So number one is to understand the main point. Whatever you feel is totally, totally normal. It's impossible to be having a feeling now or having a behavior now of any kind that is in any way not to be expected. As you know, I'm sure the women here are responding very often in different ways than your husbands or than your sons might, because there are gender differences. And I'm sure the men here are finding very different ways of responding than other family members are. And the challenge is to expand your heart and expand your soul to try to understand that when it comes to something like this, one size doesn't fit all. We're talking about over many, many centuries ago. The Gemara tells us that there was a machlokas, a difference of opinion between Rav Ami and Rav Asi on how to deal with worry, how to deal with tough times. And Rav Ami and Rav Asi, one says, Da'aga b'levish yashchen, if you have a worry in your heart, talk it out. Light up the language centers of the brain. Find somebody to talk to and keep talking and talking and talking. And for some of the people in this room and some of the people out there, that's exactly what makes sense. But then, Chad Amar, the Gemara tells us, is yashchena midato, distract yourself. You know what the best thing to do is when you're going through a horrible time? Is hesach hadas, distract yourself, think of something else. And what we know, especially in the last 20 years or so in terms of research on trauma, is that they were both right. Because for some people, distraction and a whole host of distraction-related kinds of responses is the best way to go. And for some people, talking is the best way to go. And I'm sure, as you think about the people you're closest to, no two people has exactly the same toolbox of coping mechanisms. But again, the universal wisdom from around the world is that it's totally normal to have trouble sleeping, totally normal and understandable to be irritable and angry at everybody around you, probably angry at God, angry at how could this happen as a totally innocent family and innocent children are doing a mitzvah. How do you make sense of all of this? And a whole range of emotions that are capped by the repeated question of why or how. And I don't have the answer, that's for sure. And if I told you I had the answer, you should kick me out of here, okay? Because we all know that perhaps the Kutzker said it best, okay? I can never believe in a God I can understand. And very often, the most comforting thing to answer each other and to answer yourselves and to answer your children is to say, I don't know, but still to be in it, to allow the question to be asked, because the question shows that there's still connection to what matters. Let me go through this list a little bit more. Some of you probably have a need to talk about this to the point of it being incredibly annoying. I'm sure there are times, and I see from some of the smiles in the audience, that this resonates. So there's some people who need to talk and talk and talk about this, and need to repeatedly retell where they were or what they're doing or whatever it is that they find comforting. And you may be in a place that you just can't, that hearing and listening is just absolutely doesn't work for you. I'm reminded of a couple I worked with right after 9/11. It was a newlywed couple. It was literally still during their Sheva Brachos. And he worked in the World Trade Center and barely escaped. And he walked home, about a 15-mile walk, and came home covered with ashes, totally traumatized because of what he had seen and what he had been through. And he needed to talk. He needed to talk nonstop. And his wife, who was also traumatized because she nearly lost her chassan of just a few days earlier, she needed not to talk. She needed not to hear. It was just too traumatizing for her. And they were fighting so much that it was literally jeopardizing their marriage. Now, the answer is obvious. You need somebody sometimes outside to tell you the obvious. The answer was to find him 2-3 people to talk to who were anxious to hear. His mother was dying to have him open up to her. She was already missing him for having abandoned her to get married to this woman. So for her, it was a gift, okay? And we found a couple of close friends of his to talk. And we also, because he needed to watch TV news nonstop, I told them to take some of their wedding money and go out and buy a TV set with headphone jack so that you don't have to expose his wife to the trauma of listening nonstop to the news. And that's sometimes the answer. Sometimes if you're finding a hard time, even in this immediate period of time when you're so numb, but having a hard time working together, it's fine. My father always says, couples don't have to think alike, they have to think together. So in terms of that recommendation, there are going to be gender differences, there are going to be personality differences, and that's totally okay. And sometimes it's helpful to talk to some of the wonderful counselors and therapists who are available. It's unbelievable the rich resources you have in terms of having really experienced wonderful people to talk to, from Chai Lifeline, from Sephardic Bikur Cholim, and to be able to figure out how to deal with all this. Next practical point is study after study after study shows that media coverage is often very harmful for kids to watch. So that we know that if any of your kids are glued to reading newspaper articles about this, or going online to read about it, or to see pictures, or needing to listen on radio or watch TV news or whatever it might be, the kindest thing you could do is to really not allow that to happen. There's, by this point, dozens of studies that show that their long-term adjustment will be improved if you're able to shelter them from media. You can't shelter them from talking about this. Of course you can't. And frankly, it's healthy for you to be able to model talking about it in a healthy way when you're talking to each other about it. But the bottom line is you really do need to, as much as possible, monitor exposure to media. Some of them may need to do it, in which case, try to be careful about what you let them see. It's much better to have them listen to radio than to have them watch television and see visual images. If they're looking at newspaper, make sure that you vet it first to make sure that there aren't any traumatizing pictures. But that's a practical recommendation that I think is a very important one to talk about. Okay, next. What's the most common reaction on the part of kids? Let me just review this with you. Even though I know you've heard this from a lot of different sources, I'm going to go through different ages, okay? First, let me start with preschoolers. With young kids, You have a handout that does a very nice job of summarizing this a little bit. Let me just share with you some of my experience with preschoolers going through this kind of tragedy. The most important thing to remember with preschoolers is they're concrete. So these are kids who are 3, 4, 5, even 6 years old. They tend to have a hard time processing something like this, even beyond what you and your older children have. Okay? They're going to need much more reassurance at bedtime, because at bedtime, that's when the fears emerge the most. It may be necessary temporarily to allow them to sleep in your bed with you during these initial few days. Preferably, you should stay in their room and sleep in their bed with them, and then you gradually work deals out with them in the coming weeks where you gradually pull yourself away so they get used again to sleeping on their own. But it's totally, I think, pretty much accepted by most trauma experts that you allow temporary regression during this period of time, because especially preschoolers, they don't have the ability to self-soothe. And they need to have you at their side forming a protective shield. Okay? Again, this is something we could discuss in more detail. Maybe some of my colleagues will disagree with this, which is fine. You know, we could talk that out. Okay? What we know also, thinking about different kinds of trauma and different kinds of loss, in study after study, the way you predict how a preschooler will do long-term in the face of a tragedy is how well you do, right? So the younger the kid, the higher the correlation between how their mothers and fathers do and how they do. What is it? The Gemara talks about Yotzei be'eravimo. They're almost in the same sphere as their mothers or the same sphere as their fathers. It's like one unit. And that's fine. If you're crying, modeling crying is fine. As long as they see that after you're crying that you're able to talk about it in a way that allows for expression of feelings and validating that it's okay to be sad. After the Yom Kippur War, a team of researchers followed boys and girls whose fathers were killed in the war to see what's associated with good outcomes. And it turns out that the boys and girls who lost their fathers at a very young age very often in the Yom Kippur War, if their mothers, even if they remarried, were able to model crying and sharing their sadness about the loss of their husbands, and allowed their children to continue to do that, and basically gave them validation to be able to cry and express their pain, those kids were much more resilient down the road than kids who came from families where there wasn't such modeling. Now, if you're not ready to cry, that's fine also. Sometimes it takes, some of you may be upset that you're not crying and everybody around you is crying. You know, and that's totally okay too. But at some point, it's not so much about the tears, it's much about the ability to model, the ability to talk about this and to gradually get to the point that you could show them that it's okay to be sad and okay to communicate about the sadness. Does that make sense to people? We're okay? Okay. Next, there's an importance about maintaining typical routines and schedules eventually. It's going to take a while. I'm sure in the various yeshivot that your kids are going to, things are not in the least bit normal now, nor should they be. I'm sure it's almost impossible for your kids to concentrate or for you to concentrate at work or in school or in study, and that's fine. But as time goes on in the next few weeks, part of the healing is going to come from being able to maintain and return to a routine. Okay, so that's on the preschool thing. Good? We're okay with that? Okay. Next, school age reactions. What about kids who are a little bit older? Here, and I know it's very tempting not to do this, parents should tell the truth about what happened. Even though you may think that your 7 or 8 or 9-year-old is too young to know, I'm sure you know it's impossible for them not to know, right? Sometimes people sort of convince themselves, well, how could I let such a young kid know about this? But obviously, in a neighborhood like this, it's like one body. You know, this is a neighborhood where I probably don't even have to make this point, but just in case there are people who aren't thinking about this, there's a need to tell kids in a straight way what happened, to use age-appropriate and concrete language, to remember that very often boys are particularly interested in facts and details, and answer in a way that you know that your child can handle. And also remember, they probably don't need so much detail. You don't need to go into detail. You just need to give simple, unelaborated facts in answering them. And if you're not sure what to say, or you're not sure what the answer is, just say, I don't know. And again, even kids this age find your saying, I don't know, more comforting than avoiding talking about it at all. Okay? You know, and this is one of the more difficult points, and maybe we could discuss this later on. When this tragedy happened 2.5 years ago, I'm sure many of you told your children, this can never happen again. This is a rare event, and it's a once-in-a-lifetime event, and it will not repeat itself. And now, how could you say that to your kids? How could you say that? How could you answer that? And if you did, how could they believe you? And I don't know the answer to that. The only thing I could say, though, is that this is still an incredibly rare event. You can't get, well, if you've learned one thing more than just about anybody else, it's that we're living on a very narrow bridge. This is the nature of life, is that it's a very narrow bridge. But you could still say that just because something can happen doesn't mean it will happen. And that you're safe, and focus to the extent you can in a very practical way on what they can do, okay? What they have control over. At this age, school-age children from age 7 till adolescence, they're at an age where they need action. And anything you could give them to do, be it being involved in safety planning at home in case, God forbid, they ever face a fire, in terms of letting them know how they could do good by saying Tehillim, by davening, by being involved in stucco projects, by focusing on the incredible chesed and stucco that's been out there. Look at the first responders, look at the helpers, look at the therapists, look at how this whole community has pulled together. And when you give kids this stage opportunities for action, okay? Again, it could be making a get well card for a friend who's been injured. It could be taking on extra mitzvos. It could be stucco, whatever it is, that's actually the most therapeutic thing you could do. Anytime you could channel this into the positive, it's going to make an enormous difference. And then finally, adolescence. With adolescence, the issue is they're going to want to know, how can you have tzaddik v'ralo? How could bad things happen to good people? They're at an age where they're thinking about thought. And they're able, for the first time, to really understand this at a higher level and to think about it at a more abstract level. And they can empathize with the suffering of the victims in a way that they couldn't as fully when they were younger. And they could talk to peers in a way that could pull them into endless talking and feeding on the upset of one another. And there, to the extent that you could give them a voice for their pain, validate their feelings, allow them to question without pretending to have the answers. We did a research study a number of years ago on 1,200 frum kids. And we asked them what connects them to their frumkeit. This is from around the United States. And what alienates them. And ironically, one of the biggest connectors between their bein adam l'makom, their connection to their spirituality, and their connection in terms of to the religion altogether, was when parents and teachers gave them space to question. And tragedies were often the portal and segue into spiritual growth. And that's the bottom line of all of this. The bottom line of all of this is that to the extent that over time you could see the way that a tragedy like this, which it's way too early to talk about how to make a meaning out of it, but one thing I know for sure is what the research shows and what I know from my experience and what you know deeply from your previous experience with this is that if you could use this horrible tragedy to figure out a way to reevaluate what matters and what doesn't matter in life, how to figure out how important it is to steal time with your children, to figure out what there is to be grateful for in terms of what you have. There's a beautiful Medrash Tehillim that says, Ilu nafalti lo kamti. If I never fell down, I never would have gotten up. Ilu yashafti bachoshech lo haya'arli. If I never sat in the darkness, I never would have appreciated the light. And that's always in our control. With time, not yet, it's too soon for that. Right now, numbness is the norm. And anything you feel is fine. But when we talk about the long term, and we realize that ultimately, to the extent that you could find whatever lessons for life in terms of what to prioritize, how to throw yourself into what matters, it makes all the difference in the world. I'm going to end with the remaining 5-10 minutes I have with a couple of stories, which I didn't do very much. I usually do, and I realize I have to do that, okay? So let me share. First story is a story about from a Chai Lifeline retreat. There's a Chai Lifeline retreat, and there was a child there who had recently, unfortunately, had surgery that led to him needing an artificial leg. We were sitting around in a circle having a group. And he's talking to a group of other boys, and these were young kids, about 11, 12 years old. And he said the following. When he first said it, I just couldn't believe it. He said, let me tell you something. He said, before this happened, before I had this surgery, before I got sick, I literally did not feel like I had a family that was really there for me. My parents were always running around. They were each busy making a living. My siblings were into their life. I'm the youngest. I literally felt that I had a family, but I didn't really have a family. But since this all happened, I have a family. My parents are spending a tremendous amount of time with me, a tremendous amount of time with my siblings. My siblings have been so nice and so amazing to me. Then he looks at all his friends and he says, you know something? It's worth it. If I had to do it over again, it's well worth losing this. At first glance, you think like, wow, that doesn't make sense. How could it be? But the more I've had the privilege of working with families going through horrendous loss and horrendous tragedies, of course, nobody would choose this. And of course, we're at a point where it's too early to even be thinking about this. But down the road, where the real coping mechanisms lie, is being able to find the areas of growth that could come from these reordered priorities. One other story, and then I'll end with the Duvna Magid, story of the Duvna Magid. A few years ago, I was speaking in Frankfurt at a conference for the remaining survivors of the Holocaust who still live in Europe. And together with some colleagues, I was doing groups, and I was hearing the survivors talk about what had happened to them, talk about how they're coping with it. And there was a man there who was the happiest man I ever met in my life. Yet I knew he had suffered horribly in the camps. He was such a happy man. He had such a simchas chayim, such a joie de vivre, that everybody wanted to hang around him because it was contagious. So it was the last day of the conference, and I figure I may never see him again. So I went over to him, and I said, please tell me, what's the secret of your simcha? You've told me how you suffered. How did you preserve this optimistic view of life after all of your losses? He had pretty much lost his entire family, and he had suffered horribly during his years in the camps. And he was a very articulate man. He was a little embarrassed at having to answer this, but he told me. He talked about how horrific it was at 3, 4 in the morning to have to run out when they had roll call, and if you were too slow and you fell down, the dogs would be put on you. If you actually somehow weren't fast enough, the machine guns would go. And he said he always managed to get out during those horrible years. And he said he knows exactly what allowed him to do it. What allowed him to do it is he developed the ability to feel the warmth of his father's hands on his head when he benched him, when he gave him a bracha every Friday night, and feel and smell the sweetness of his breath when he bent down to kiss him after a bracha on Friday night. Now, you may not have that minhag of giving a bracha on Friday night, but metaphorically, that's what you do with your children all the time. That's what you do with them all the time. You're there for them, embracing them in your love. I told this story over a few months later on a trip to South Africa. And there was a survivor in the audience who came over to me. And he was an extremely wealthy man. And I had been at his house for some events we had when I was in Johannesburg. And he told me, David, let me tell you what that story gets me in touch with, he says. He said, you know what I have. You know that I have one of the biggest estates in the country. You know I have a business that makes me one of the wealthiest men on this continent. And you know about my art collection and my grounds and my car collection. He said, I just want to tell you something that story got me in touch with. He said, you know what? I'd give it all up just for the opportunity to be able to walk to shul only once with my mother on one hand and my father on the other holding their hands. He said, I have to understand and realize that it's all about gratitude. It's all about focusing on what you have. And to the extent that you could do that and make that perhaps one of the ways that you could add to your toolbox of coping mechanism, because that you always have control over. You always have control over that concept of ilu nafalti lo kamti ilu yashati b'choshech lo haya arli. And I'll just end with the beautiful story of the Duvna Magid, because we can't ever undo what happens. A loss is a loss. And each of you will find your own mode of coping, and it'll change over time. And the numbness will gradually give way to some form of viewing this a little bit differently. And I know it's too soon to talk about the growth, but I'll end with the thought of the Duvna Magid, because I find that it's one of the ways of approaching a period such as this. He talks about a king who was an insecure king, who had a crown. And in the center of the crown, there was a jewel bigger than the Hope Diamond. And the king was very insecure, but every night he would look at his crown and look at his diamond in the center, make him feel good about himself, make him feel that he had the best of what anybody could possibly have. And one morning he wakes up, goes to his nightstand, takes his crown to put it on his head, and is totally spooked by realizing that a flaw developed right down the center of the diamond. and he sees it as a terrible omen. And he puts out a call to the kingdom that anybody who could fix this flaw, he said, I'll make wealthier beyond his wildest dreams. And jewelers come from all over the world, but you can't fix the flaw in a diamond. Flaw in a diamond is the flaw in the diamond. A loss is a loss. Tragedy is tragedy. You can't get it back. Life can't be the same. But a little old Jew comes in, and he takes an engraving tool, and he engraves around the flaw of the diamond magnificent leaves that now make the flaw into the trunk of a tree that makes the diamond even more beautiful than it was before. May we all be zocha. May we all be privileged to join together as one in this community in terms of being able to gradually come to the point that we could see the lessons that could come out of this in terms of growth and coping and eventually refuas hanefesh and refuas haguf. Thank you.
I want to thank SPH, Lifeline, everybody else involved, and give me this opportunity to get things off my chest. The Nefteret was the art teacher in my school of girls. The 3-year-old was a student in my nursery. The boy who, Baruch Hashem, escaped was the 7th grader in my boys' school. And everybody that's related to them is a member of the community that I deal with every day. So I've been dealing with trauma for a while, especially since 2009 when my son became ill, and Baruch Hashem he's well. And working with the people at MHR as a crisis intervention specialist is a learning process. Every case, every incident, we end up in a room together looking at each other, and everybody's dealing with different aspects of the tragedy. But we consider ourselves a team, just like a Hatzalah ambulance coming to save a life. We also come to save a soul. So I want to thank Rochelle, and Eva, and the people involved, Audrey, that run that awesome branch of SPH. I have less answers than the doctor. The doctor has studies, he has stories, he has experience to maybe answer some questions. I always look beyond the questions. I'm not good with questions. I know when I say the Amidah every day, in the first beracha, I say El Elyon. And if you would read an English translation, it would probably mean the Lord that is lofty or above. One of the explanations for it is not that he's up there somewhere, but that he's beyond comprehension. We love Hashem, we believe in Hashem, but nobody has a picture of Hashem. By the way, I didn't hear the doctor say that when you talk to your children, please don't say Hashem did it, or he took her, or he went. They have their own images of Hashem. Let's leave it blank for the time being. Correct, doctor? Sorry, he left that one out. I've been getting calls as well, and I've been dealing with the teachers in my school and the children and the families, and it's very important to know children are a lot better at this than us. They're able to deal with it, especially the younger ones, and pass it on and get back to playing whatever they're playing with. But from a standpoint of an adult, I've been hearing all the questions, basically the same list. They were doing a mitzvah, how could they be harmed? They're such good people. How many can we take? We had one a week ago, we had one a month ago, we had one 6 weeks ago. Unfortunately, we're aware of one or two on the immediate horizon that might happen soon. Young people, people supposed to live a long life and raise families, and from a psychological standpoint, I don't mean to step on the doctor's toes, I was dealing with a couple who lost a child. And the child fought for life for about 15 months or 18 months before passing. And the parents had really been through the emotional ringer. And I contacted a friend at Mayo Clinic who suggested I purchase a book. And medical books are very expensive. They're not worth the amount of paper that they use. A 200-page book was about $60. But it was called Reproductive Trauma. And I learned a lesson about all trauma. We paint pictures. We create stories from when we're little children about how life is supposed to go. A little girl thinks, I'm just like my mommy. My mommy was a little girl. My mommy grew up. My mommy got married. My mommy had children. My mommy's now a grandma. And I'm going to follow the same path. And anything that doesn't match that story is a trauma. It's a disappointment. It's a jolt to the dream life that people dream of when they're little. And some people don't get married so easily. And some people get married, and lo aleinu, they don't have children. And there are certain people that have children and they lose them, etc., etc. And we've been experiencing them all as a community in rapid fire. And each one of those disappointments is a trauma because it doesn't match the reproductive story. But I brought that not to be a medical lesson. It's a life lesson of how we're supposed to approach life. People are born, we're brought up, we're shown the good life. We have holidays together, we go on vacation together, we enjoy all the good things Hashem has placed on this earth for us together. And we create a picture or a dream or a life story that's all good. There's no potholes, there's no bumps in the road. You even go to Avenue P and you find parking. It's just perfect. And then things happen to upset the story we created. And I will propose tonight that one of the reasons we have questions is because we don't understand why we're here. And we don't understand how it's supposed to be. So therefore, when we're disappointed, we have a question. Why? How? Can't be. Such good people, such a this, such a that. And each time it happens, we decide that this is not how it's supposed to be. And I ask you a question. Who said so? Why did we come here? What are we doing here? What's the point of being born and living and going on to the next world? What are we doing here? The books in Musar all ask the same question. I'm here. What do I focus on? What do I spend my time on? Or better yet, what am I trying to achieve? Hashem gave us a present. He gave us a gift. And we live every moment. And every moment is a gift. And we're supposed to use that gift productively. And that's why we're here. And if we think we're here to be on vacation, you're wrong. It's like a man leaving his family, leaving his children, missing his son's birthday, and going to China, and sitting on the hotel balcony reading his iPad. The wrong thing. You're not there. You're there to work. You're there to accomplish, to buy goods, to meet with buyers, to do things to help your business. And if you're sitting on the patio reading the iPad and you're not home, what'd you leave home for? Stay home and read on the balcony of your house. Sit on the porch. So we have to understand we came here to accomplish. We came here to grow. We came here to start as a seed and become a full-fledged, fully developed, perfected human being. And that's work. And that's struggle. And that takes training. The trainer in the gym, everybody loves their trainer. I don't know why. They love their trainer. There's people taking their trainer on vacation with them. Crazy people. They can't live without my trainer. What does the trainer tell you? More, try, push, do. You can, you can. I can't, I'm tired. Please, no, push. So what do you love him for? Or her if you're female. I hope you have your own gender as a trainer. But the trainer is pushing you to a limit. Why? Well, I used to go to the gym. I know I don't look at it anymore. I used to go to the gym. And when I went to the gym, maybe, I hate to say it, about 40 years ago, they invented a thing called the Nautilus machine. We were guys who used to lift the loose weights, and all of a sudden there was this thing in the middle of the room. You could do everything on it. And so the trainer came over, and he said, let me show you how to use it. And for each one of us, he would take the pin, put it in, tell us how many times to do what. And another guy came, he looked a little smaller, he moved the pin down, moved the pin up. And each one of us went around that machine. And the first time, by the way, you get a little nauseous, and you run to see if you're going to be able to get your head straight from dizziness. But what did he do with us? He pushed us to our baseline limit. And then, after 2 or 3 weeks, or maybe a month, of pushing that limit, do 10 times up and down 3 times. And that was at 50 pounds. And then a week later, it was 55 pounds. And then a month later, he tried 70 pounds. And where we were with 50, we became with 70. But 50 was a joke. Because now 50 is like this. Because the potential was developed into a new reality. That I was stronger than I was when I started. We start as children. We become age of mitzvot. We grow into independence. Then we have to become responsible. You picturing yourself so far? You become responsible for yourself, then for others. And all along the way, it's harder than it was before, it's more difficult than it ever was before. And the problems you had as a child was that your brother got the red lollipop and you got the green one. And your problem in high school is you got 3 regents on the same day, you also have a Gemara test. And your problem as a dater is they're not finding your shidduch. And your problem as a parent is you have a big meeting tomorrow and the baby doesn't feel well, it's crying all night. By the way, ladies, don't buy it. When you see a shoulder under the blanket, he does hear. But he just doesn't get up. That's the chokhmat nashim banta bayit, but chokhmat adam, a man, is not to move when you hear the baby cry. She might just ask you to get up instead. So the point being that as we grow, the test becomes more difficult because we are stronger from the last test, and therefore we need a new test just to make it a test. You don't ask a person who rides 100 miles on one of these fancy bikes to ride a tricycle around the backyard because it's nothing. If he fits, I don't know, maybe he doesn't fit. But you have to understand that people who make it to the major leagues are up against baseballs thrown at 90 and 100 miles an hour. We're in the schoolyard around the corner, it's 30 miles an hour. And they both think they're playing at their maximum. But the person who goes on to develop himself could be in the major leagues and could be in the Super Bowl. Now comes the big question. Why us? Why this community? Why so much? If a person has several children, and the children are gifted with different levels of capability, different talents, different genius, different midot, and the parent sees one who, no matter what they try, not going to make it. Let's just make sure he's an upstanding citizen, he prays with the minyan, and he becomes a worker and raises a family. Let's work on the basics. Then they have this talented child. Could be a violin player, could be a Talmid Chacham, but has a talent. The amount of time and effort invested in that child from the parent is not unfair, it's realistic. This child can go places, I have to make sure he or she doesn't fall short. So I invest more time and effort in that one than the one who's weaker. I take care of them, I give them all they need. But I don't expect as much, so I don't invest as much. Hashem sees the world. He sees the people on the planet. He sees those that can take it, and he sees those that can't. He sees those potential, and he sees those that don't have it. When Avraham Avinu was tested 10 tests, as it says in the Mishnah, Asara nisyonot nasa Avraham Avinu, ve'amad bekulam. Each one was more difficult than the one before. Each one was a higher level. Until at the point where he told him, go take your son and slaughter him. Anybody ready? You're not doing it. Because you're not Avraham. Avraham was developed by Hashem into the person who could pass that test. But when he told him, Lech Lecha, we're not so sure he could have passed Lech, El Arz Asher Arega. There's 2 lechs in the first test and the 10th test. When he was first approached, he was asked to leave home. Okay, I promise you're going to be rich, you're going to have a good business. Leave home, go right tell him. Then he told him, take your son and slaughter him wherever I tell you, and he got up and went. It's possible to say, I can't predict what Avraham Avinu would do, that he wasn't ready for the Akedah when he was told Lech Lecha. But he was ready for the Akedah, and that's when Hashem tested him, and he called him Avraham Ohavi, the one I love. Et asher yehav Hashem yochiach. Hashem tests and reproves and disciplines, not the bad kid, not the kid that he wants to throw out of the house, the one he loves. Et asher yehav Hashem yochiach. Hashem loves us. He sees the greatness of this community. He sees the level we're at. But he has to work on something for us. Because we're lacking in something. Not for me to say. Just a thought. No paper. No speech. We're asking questions. We're getting up to here. And we're starting to think thoughts that are weak in emunah. They show flaws in our emunah. It's not your fault. Every test that comes is one level above where you are right now. It's testing our chesed. We no longer have $5 chesed projects. We need $500,000 for this family, we need $1 million for this building, we need $500,000 for this project. It's big. Because we're great in chesed. But there's always another level of support for others, another level of being an outward person, not an inward person, another level of not coming into the world with your hands clenched against your chest, but going out like this. Tests us in chesed. He tests us in tefillah. But I think lately, the primary test has been emunah. The Chafetz Chaim predicted it. He lived from the 1830s to the 1930s. In a time when people didn't live 50 or 60 years, he lived 100 or plus. He noticed there was a thing called a telephone. Didn't exist when he was born. There's a thing called a radio. Didn't exist when he was born. There's a thing called an airplane. Didn't exist when he was born. There was telegraph, not email, when he was born. Missing. It was there. And he asked himself, why is it now we even have moving pictures? Charlie Chaplin. He said, throughout the millennia, from Moshe till now, we were taught Ayin Ra'ah ve'ozen shamat ve'akol b'sefer nichtavim. There's an eye watching, there's an ear listening,
Let's take a look.
and everything's being recorded. And people believed it be'emunah peshuta. But as people started to lose the ability to believe that after 120 years, there's going to be a videotape in color, moving, of your life and all that you did and said. And as we lose that concept, Hashem showed us man can do it. Why can't I? By the way, in that movie, there's a little bubble above your head saying what you're thinking as well. Not only what they can see or hear. The emunah weakens, the technology showing that it's possible to record goes up. There is Hashem. He's in charge. He did this. I did use the Magid's mashal in my piece in Hamodia for this Friday. I knew right away you're going to say about the engraving. But I also used that the lo ta'atzevu. Yosef reveals himself. His brothers are frightened. They're scared stiff. What is he going to do to them now? Just don't be scared, don't be frightened. You didn't put me here. Hashem sent me here. And He sent me for good purpose, l'mihya. He sent me ahead of you. He prepared the refuah for the makkah. That's a man of emunah. From the minute he smelled that perfume on the caravan, as he was sold from his brothers to an ISIS caravan, tied up with these ugly, horrible-looking murderers, 17 years old, he believed Hashem was with him. We have an obligation to always believe Hashem is with us. Sometimes it feels good, sometimes it feels bitter. Sometimes it's comfortable, Sometimes it's painful. But bitter is not bad. Try and make a lahm hajim without oil. Can you make it? You need the bitter. Try and make something that's not sour. Make a hamid without sour, without lemons. You can't do it. You need the sour to be good. Now, these are foods that we make. Translation for the section over here. Sour, bitter, painful. Hatzalah comes. They resuscitate. They break a few ribs. The person's in pain. Is it good? Yeah. Is it bad? No. Does it hurt? Yes. So hurt, pain, sour, bitter is not bad because it comes from Hashem. And Hashem knows how much we can take. And He's one step above what we're able to take. And He's testing us because He loves us. And He's giving it to us because He sees our potential. And the trainer is screaming, push, push, you can do better. I was walking at the funeral the other night, and a man came over to me in tears. We're doing so well. Why is this happening? I said, we don't decide who's doing well. He decides who's doing well. Yes, there are more classes. Yes, we're all in minyanim. Yes, we're all eating kosher. Yes, we're all doing better. We're all trying harder. But that doesn't mean we're at our full potential. We have room for growth. We have room for improvement. And every test you pass makes you stronger. You know, when a child doesn't feel well, the parent comes with the medicine. And there's nothing stronger than those two lips pressing together to prevent you from giving the medicine. So you hold the nose, you beat them up, you do whatever you have to get that mouth open and pour in the medicine, which I hope you're not wearing white. Because half is going to end up on you, but half will go down. The child has no idea why this bitter tasting stuff, why my father's holding me down, my mother's holding my nose, and I don't like this, they must hate me. Doesn't know that if you don't take this medicine, you might not get better. We're doing it for you. We must believe that as the children of Hashem. That sometimes it doesn't feel good. Sometimes it looks bad, but it's not. From above, nothing bad comes. I know you have questions. The other night, some girls asked me in a class, what can we do? Should we do this or should we do that? Do both. Why not? Whatever you can do better tomorrow than you did today is an improvement. But we pray in the morning, Al tivieni deni sayon. I don't want another test. Abraham Avinu, when he came down from the mountain with Yitzchak, asked Hashem, don't test me anymore. So says Rav Nassim Machmo, alav Hashem. We don't ask for a test. But we're not the daddy and we're not the trainer. We're the trainee and we're the child. Our job is to accept and believe that it's coming from someone who loves us and it's for our own good. There's a story I don't use much anymore because it was published by a friend of mine named Rabbi Pesach Kron. He loves good stories. I gave in, I let him publish it. We were in Sloan Kettering in 2010. My son was not doing so well. He was way underweight, not eating, not speaking, barrage of painkillers, immune suppressed, catching everything that walked into the room, and fighting the leukemia. And one day, a doctor came in and said, we have to go down for a test we think we have to operate. And I pointed to the bed and said, operate on who? He says, yes, we don't think someone in that condition can survive it, but we might not have a choice. We might have to weigh risk against benefit. What's the test? The test, okay. No details. We don't need the gory details. A doctor comes and says, may I go down with you for the test? I said, doctor, you can come, but why? He said, I like to come down. Okay. Usually we go down with somebody who wheels the transport bed. We come back with someone who wheels the transit. Getting a nurse to go with you is something special. He says, no, I just like to come with you. So we squeezed onto the elevator. My wife, son's wife, the doctor, the transport guy, the bed. We went down, and when you get to the staging area, they tell the parents, go sit over there. And the wheelie went to the other side of the room where there was a curtain with all the beds lined up for the tests. And the doctor went with my son, and we stayed back. We see them together. We're praying. Baruch Hashem, they came back with the results, and they said whatever they thought was wrong was either a mistake or it healed itself. A certain hole in a certain place. Baruch Hashem, no operation is necessary. A few short weeks later, in walks this doctor who was always on the rounds with us and said, I came to say goodbye. Where are you going? He said, I've been in Sloan Kettering for 10 years. I decided what I want my specialty to be. And to do that, I have to go to a different hospital for training. So I'm leaving. So I came to say goodbye to Mickey. Okay. Mickey, goodbye. I was a curious guy in those days. I said, doctor, can I ask you a question? Why'd you come to this room to say goodbye? Are you going to all the rooms? He said, no. I've been here 10 years, and your son, if he's not my favorite patient, he's in the top 3. Now, I hate going back to those days in my mind. Doctor, I could see you after maybe. But he lay there, hardly speaking, on all kinds of support, and wasn't the most entertaining young man at that time. So I asked him, why? And he said, well, remember that day? I said, I'll never forget that day as long as I live. I hope to live to 120, but it left an impression. So he said, yes. He said, well, when we left you, I was there. Now, he was not a Jewish. In fact, he was a Hindu. He was an Indian. And he said, he doesn't know how to say chizuk, but he said, I came really to give him chizuk. And when I went with him to the waiting area, I tried to tell him, don't worry, Mickey, it's going to be better. And he didn't answer me as he never did. He just nodded. And then I said, Mickey, trust me, it's going to be better. And he nodded. And I thought all my efforts of encouraging him were lost. So I said, Mickey, why don't you believe me that it's going to be better? And he spoke to me. He said, do you know my father? A weak voice saying, do you know my father? He says, do I know your father? Who could you name in this hospital doesn't know your father? He says, not him. Him. And he pointed upwards. And the doctor said, oh yeah, I heard about that. I know you Jewish people. He said, doctor, my father is perfect. He put me here. So this, for right now, is perfect. So how could you tell me it's going to get better? He said, Rabbi Beyda, for a man that young, in his position, in his condition, to tell me that, there's something in that book you learned that we don't have. From that day forward, I realized why the doctor came to the room. Not to tell me there was a Kiddush Hashem because Mickey said it's perfect. For me to know, and for me to pass on to others, that whatever Hashem does is perfect. Without a doubt, without a question. Don't even entertain the thought that you know better. Our job is to accept it. Our job is to know that it's my daddy. I stepped off the curb on Ocean Parkway against the light, and there was a slap that almost knocked me off my feet back onto the sidewalk. And the beauty of that slap is when I turned around, it was my daddy. And I knew it was a good slap. We're getting slapped in rapid fire. We're getting punched and beat up. Some mornings don't even want to go to shul. Afraid of what am I going to hear new? When the thing buzzes in my pocket, I don't want to look. Who knows what the email is going to say? Pray for who, for what? And so, how do I deal with it? I know it's for my benefit. I know it's my daddy. And I know it's perfect. So I go on. And I strengthen my belief. And I suppress my anger. I reject my questions. And I say it's Hashem and it's perfect. I'm not Yosef, I don't smell perfume. I'm not Yosef, I might hold a grudge against somebody. But he told his brothers, it's not you, it's Hashem. He sent me here, lemechiyah, for good. Whatever happens, even if you don't feel it, even if you can't comprehend it, even if you don't understand it, I promise you, it's Hashem and it's good. And we should all live and be well. To live to see the explanation and the answers to all our questions. And why everything that happened to our people in this long galut and in previous galuyot and throughout our history was all for good and all for our benefit and all from Hashem, our daddy who loves us. Thank you.
Even today, I mean, when we see there were survivors of this fire, half the family's gone, half the family survived. Do we look
And the
at
cousin.
It, huh?
And the cousin, my 7th grader.
Do we look at it like, why did they survive? Why is there some purpose?
Tell you an interesting fact. Sit down. He writes books, we have to set it straight. Something happened that was what we would call negative or bad. And somebody came and told me that it happened because of something I did. And I was shaken to the core. Because I did do what he said. Maybe it was not the nicest thing I did in my life. But to think that it caused a serious problem, I was shaken. Hashem is on my side. I left where I was, and I went for a walk around the block, and my cell phone rang. And it was Rabbi Yaakov Hillel calling me from Israel. I think it's the only time ever called me in my life, that minute. And he asked me about how someone was doing, that he knew I would know the answer. So I told him the person's condition, and then I asked him the question. I said, you know, I did this once, and now this person's suffering, and this guy came, he pointed a finger at my face, and he said, this happened because you did that. Rabbi, I'm shaking. He said, calm down. He said, they call me a mikubal, but I learned with the mikubalim of the last generation. And from the last generation to this generation, you're talking 10 generations of Kabbalah. And I will tell you one thing. None of the mikubalim of the last generation will tell you this happened because of that. There is no answer. And your question is a false question. Because you're asking somebody, is this because of this? Who knows? Did the Holocaust happen because of this or that? I don't know. Did this person become ill because of that? I don't know. Nobody knows. El Elyon, my opening line. Hashem knows and nobody else knows. You have a right to sit home and think whatever you want, but make sure it's kosher. Don't question Hashem. That's it.
Any others? Rabbi?
This lady.
It's very difficult. We're having such a hard time with this. What happened is coming in my head. Everybody's sad. We're so sad.
Yes. Is sad an emotion? Wait, did you ever go to a wedding and you were happy?
Yes.
Did you blame Hashem for that?
Yes.
Do you ask why me when you're happy? You only ask why me when you're sad.
No,
But when Hashem gives somebody a baby, you say, why did she have a baby? But when somebody passes away or gets sick, you say, why her? We don't ask why.
It's not the why part.
What's the why part?
Dealing with it now. We're not. It's very hard to deal with it. It's not the why. Why? Just that thinking about it all the time.
You might have broken a bone, and today it hurts, and tomorrow it hurt less, and the next day it'll hurt less. Yes, you have to deal with the pain, and you have to deal with the emotion. And if you want to see the doctor, maybe he'll stay 10 minutes after and explain to you how to deal with it. But if you're not sad now, you're not human. You're supposed to be sad. That's the test of this week. That a tragedy happened to a community, and the whole community is suffering, and each one is suffering in their own way, and each one has to deal with it. But that's okay, because when I went to the machine, the guy put it on the bottom rung because I was a 40-pound weakling, and I had a friend there with muscles, he put it higher up. Each one has their own test. Your sadness is not my sadness. I had to deal with 3 buildings of schools, with all the teachers upset, and tell them, go into the classroom and act normal. Right, doctor? Go into the classroom and smile. And the ones who didn't, I put them in a room with Rochelle. Until they could smile, they were not allowed to go to the classroom. Were they sad? They were sad. Were they upset? They were upset. Some of them related to them. But life is for the living. As a Ma'amar Chazal, even a mourner is not allowed to mourn excessively. You mourn, you get up after 7, you shave after 30, you say Kaddish till 12, go back to the wedding. That's life. I can't change that for you. But I can tell you, you're allowed to be sad. I validate your feelings. You may be more than her, or less than her, or more than her. Everybody's dealing with it differently. And depending on how sensitive you are to this type of tragedy, you may hear somebody's car was stolen, doesn't bother you. The guy loves cars, it bothers him. Everybody's different. So, as we say, stand that way. Take it easy, go slowly, and you'll heal. Go ahead, doctor. That's my interpretation. Now you get the real psychological facts.
Yeah, it's interesting because there are two approaches here that I think are synergistic and not either or. But answering as a psychologist as opposed to as a Rav, the bottom line is that the essence of what I feel makes sense here is that it's valid, it's fine. It's fine to be, as you're saying that you're sad all the time. To me, it's a normal reaction to an abnormal event. I hear the difference of perspective here.
No, I did validate her feelings. I understand that.
Right.
I know everybody.
Yeah.
Nobody's dancing to this.
Yeah,
But
no. But I'm keep it on a purely psychological level, not on a theological level. I hear and I very much appreciate the theological perspective, but on a psychological level, I think that there are a couple of points to this. One is I hear it feels terrible. I hear that it's probably feeling now like it may never get better, okay? Or it may never get different. And it feels like it's hard to go on. And that's all totally what comes with this level tragedy, especially since it's compounded by past events. A day will come that it'll be viewed somewhat differently and viewed in a way that will become, God willing, more bearable. But right now, the important thing is to give yourself permission to feel whatever it is that you feel, and then eventually to come up with what in your toolbox of coping mechanisms helps best. So, the Rav Hirsch said something beautiful and very deep, even though it may not sound deep. He says, the vowelization of what it says in Tehillim, Keli Keli Lama Azaftani. God, why did you abandon me? The vowelization should be Lama, not why, but what. And when you go from the why to the what, the psychology would say, okay, so you have this intensely sad and heavy and weighed down feeling where it's hard to go on. So according to this way of thinking, the what is, okay, so what do I need to do in order to do the other things that I need to have happen in my life? What do I do? What in the past has helped me cope with these kind of intense feelings? And how do I balance these intense feelings with the need to be there for other people in my life? So I know it may sound almost vapid, and empty to say, it's valid, it's fine to feel this way, but I think that it's basically what we're saying here from the prism of theology and the prism of psychology is basically the same thing, okay? It's valid, it's okay, it's not helpful to ask the why, it's more helpful to figure out about the what, and then to understand it and to give yourself permission to feel that way. That's where we diverge, I think, okay? Because what I'm hearing from you, Rabbi, is, and I may be getting it wrong, is that in other words, I don't think it's what you mean to say at all. And I don't know if anybody is hearing it this way, but the question is, are people hearing it as saying that you can't, you have to always see it as the next level of test. And Hashem Tzaddik Yivcha.
I used two Arabic words that you didn't get.
What's there?
Stenna shwaya.
I didn't get it. Yeah.
Healing takes time.
Healing takes time.
Take it easy.
Uh-huh.
You're feeling the way you're feeling,
Got it.
but this
Got
too
it.
shall pass. He didn't
Got
get
it. Got it.
Obvious from his comment.
That's
he
what,
didn't get
that's
it.
what you have for inviting an Ashkenazi to speak. Yeah. Even though I've been living in Great Neck for almost 35 years.
My grandmother's name was Katz.
Got it. Okay. Anyway,
Really? Yes.
I hear. Yes, please.
Let's say a second grader who knew the second grader and passed away and is traumatized by the idea of fire, so much to the point where he sees his mother cooking. Are you cooking? Why are you cooking? What's at the fire? Don't light a candle. What do you do?
Yeah, do you hear me okay? Yeah. So the question is, second grader who is a classmate and a friend of the second grader who was lost in the fire, and is now responding by fear of fire. there's the short-term reaction and the long-term reaction. So the short-term reaction, I would say, is to basically just reassure him, let him know when you're going to be using fire. Come up together with him a plan on how to make him feel safe when you're using fire. So, have him come up with an active coping plan that works for him in terms of that. But ultimately, over time, the way to overcome it is to avoid avoidance. Meaning that the way he'll eventually get to the point that it'll become a less intense trigger for him would be to gently face a little bit at a time his fear of fire till it extinguishes. And again, like the rabbi said so beautifully, and I wish I could. You'll have to teach me the words, okay? With time, it'll
take it easy.
With time, it'll come. With time, it'll come. But it's fine initially in these initial weeks, probably even in an initial month. It's totally fine to allow him to have those feelings and to protect him and allow him to avoid confronting it. And then,
You validate it? You say, okay.
Well, it's a combination, but it's a combination of, you have to think of it on different channels. So you validate it, it's fine to feel that way, and also say what will make you feel more safe. So it may be that when you're going to be cooking, you put him in a room to distract himself, or when you're cooking, come up with a plan that'll make him feel safer. And then, as you see him getting stronger, okay, because it's going to come. It's going to come with not that much time. You gently come up with a plan of having him grow the muscle of avoiding the avoidance and facing the fear, but don't go for broke, okay? You go a little bit at a time. Ask him first before you protect him, saying, is there anything you could do now to expose yourself to this fear and to confront it a little bit? But that you may have to wait a good month till you could start doing that, but you'll see how he's doing. Okay? Yeah. Anything you want to add to that, Rabbi?
I have a question.
Yeah.
You said before, like Hashem gives us tests, and we have to get better, and we have to improve ourselves, and have more emunah. Is death a part of a test?
Is death part of life?
Yes.
Since Adam, people have been dying. And people have been dealing with death. The problem is, we all have this story that death comes after 120. So when it comes at any other time in life, we get traumatized. And the shock of seeing somebody 7, 14, 21, 33 passing away makes it seem like the wrong time. But it's not the wrong time. We perceive it as the wrong time. But it's the right time, and it's the right place, and that's what happens that we don't understand. But because we don't understand, we get upset. But if we start to understand that, wait a minute, I know a lot of people that passed away. Some of them were old, some of them were young. Some of them were children, some of them were men, some of them were women. Everybody gets to that day. So if you're asking me, is it part of life? It's part of life. Does it have to be dealt with? Every case is different. Every time it happens is different. Some people, 100-year-old mother passes away and they can't recover.
So is it punishment for the family?
It's not a punishment, no. It's part of life. When a baby's born, it's a gift. When somebody's taken away, we cry because we miss them. But, hold this please. Am I here? I'm here? Am I still here?
Yes.
What's missing? My jacket. I took off my jacket. Your body is your jacket. And when your body stops functioning, your neshama is still there, and it's still functioning, and it's still working. And in fact, when a baby comes out of the womb, the first thing it does, scream bloody murder. Right? Rah! Clean me, get the drops out of my eyes, suck me, feed me, I'm cold. Right? Who are these people with the white suits, and what are these bright lights? Why? I was living in Olam Haba. I didn't have to work. I was eating. I didn't have to go to the bathroom. I didn't need Zantac. I was doing great. What am I doing here? But 25 years later, they don't want to leave here. This is the best thing ever. I won't go back there for anything. And then they go through the doorway to the next world. So they're doing better. We miss them, so we cry. We feel badly that they didn't stay with us, so we cry. But for them, trust me, the jacket was taken off, but they're still here.
I have a
Yes.
question.
Oh, yes, yeah.
That's the religious answer.
I love religious
This is actually a
answers.
question for both, in both levels, spiritual and psychology. I know you started with whatever we feel is normal, but is it normal to feel guilt that we didn't learn our lesson because we're in deja vu again?
Sure. So the question is, and it is both theologic and psychological. I'll take it first, just because I'm holding the mic. So the question is, the question about is among the normal array of emotions, is guilt normal or is guilt somehow not normal? So it's interesting. Is that the question?
Yeah, but we did discuss it,
She's
Yeah.
feeling
Right,
like
sure.
It's the same
Right.
lesson. Does
Yeah.
that mean I didn't learn it?
Right. So understandable, right? The question is like, if we did it right last time, this should not have had to happen. So, and that's part of what makes this so incredibly painful. In general, though, let me talk about guilt from a psychological, at least a Jewish psychological standpoint. Guilt is not bad, okay? There's two kinds of guilt. There is a bad, unhealthy, psychologically unhealthy kind of guilt, and then there's a positive kind of guilt that could be a source of growth. So the bad kind of guilt is where you beat yourself up and say, I'm a bad person. This happened because I'm evil, or because our community is evil, or because we've done terrible things. So that kind of pathological self-blame, where you basically, the guilt is of beating yourself up in a way that only makes you feel worse and gets you further caught in the quicksand. That is not healthy. Then there's behavioral guilt, which is what you were alluding to before. Behavioral guilt is where you say to yourself, okay, something happened here. The Gemara tells us that Emira Davar Ra, if something horrific happens, Yifashvesh b'masav. Okay, one of the responses is you need to look at what can I find personally in terms of a self-examination about what I need to work on for myself. Okay? And that's more a behavioral reaction. What can I do differently in terms of dealing with this? Okay? Does it mean that I myself have to eventually come, maybe I have to work a little more on emunah, or on chesed, or on whatever it might be. I can't tell you what it is. It's going to be different for every person in this room. That's associated with good outcomes. That's associated. So from a psychological standpoint, my answer is it depends on whether or not, which of the two types of guilt, and the behavioral guilt, which you're alluding to, because you're saying behavioral. If we did it right last time, it shouldn't have happened this time. For the answer to that question, I turn you to the expert. That's the theological question. Here.
It's a great question, but there's no answer. Again, we don't know why. So how you can tell that we did what we're supposed to is much greater than myself, because I don't know if we did what we're supposed to. And I don't even know if a tragic passing of a person today was sent to teach the same lesson as a tragic passing of somebody a month ago. And it says in that same Gemara, Yipashpesh b'ma'asav, Yisurim b'ayim elav yipapesh ma'asav, and there are those who say Yimashmesh. Yimashmesh means to feel the quality. There's a nice silk, that's Yimashmesh. Yipashpesh is, where is it? We could look into our deeds and say, we fixed it. And Hashem may say, but what about the quality? You're eating kosher, to what level? You're praying? How? You're doing mitzvot? Who says it's the right way? We could always improve. We can always do better. We can always do more. But to connect it and say, I solved the problem because I got the message, I don't know how you know that.
No, I'm saying the opposite. I feel like we didn't pass the test, therefore we were tested again with the ticket.
No. No, not true. Not true. You take a guy, I used to like baseball. I don't know anything about it anymore. But I used to like baseball. We used to play baseball at PS 215 on East 3rd. Then we found out there's a little league. So some boys board, and you played on a real baseball field, but it was small. There are people who do that, and then they go play in the minor leagues. And then they play in the major leagues. And they're on a not so good team. And then they play on a good team. And then they get to the World Series. They were playing baseball every day. They were getting better every day. And because they did pass the test, they got another test. But this time it paid more. Because a player in the major leagues who gets suspended for 3 days loses about $1 million because he gets $400,000 a game. But me in the schoolyard, I didn't lose nothing because I was playing in the little leagues. We are at a level as a community. We are so close to Mashiach. The emunah in the world is being tested so that the stakes are so high that even if we improve and pass, there's another one coming very quickly. Now the Chafetz Chaim said, the days before Mashiach are like the 6,000 days of the years of the world. Sunday was the first 1,000 days, Monday was the second 1,000 days. We're in the 6,000th right now. And the same way, I don't know about you, but I can tell you, everybody else in the room, Friday afternoon at 3:30, they're in a hurry. And things are happening very quickly, and you can't get enough done in time. We are in the Friday afternoon, the Erev Shabbat of history. And everything is coming very quickly. The mitzvot, the averot, the tragedies, the blessings. You can have 3 weddings in one night. How come you have to go to 3 weddings? People, in the old days, Charetz had a wedding once a month. Why do we have 3 weddings in one night to go to? 2 engagements, a wedding, and a pidyon. What is that? It's rapid fire. You don't ask how come so much good. You only ask how come so many tragedies. It's the 6th day in the afternoon. Mashiach is close. Everything's happening in rapid fire. And we, as people, must deal with it because Shabbat's coming, and then we can rest. I think we should stop.
We have one parenting question that likes to happen,
Okay.
just because it's not, I'd like, you had a parenting question, right?
We weren't in the same class or school as the boys, but our boys actually all went to camp, the second grader, and they all said the same thing. They all said how his qualities and his midot were sterling, and he was Ohev Shalom and Ogev Shalom, and they all came up with that right away. The question that I think we have is more like, should we harp on that and let them remember it, let them talk with it? I mean, like, my son didn't stop crying for all night. He was like, what do I do? I want to say, I didn't even get to say thank you. He was like, he was feeling guilty that he didn't go through whatever he thought he needed to do. But now, like today, they had a chagiga in school, things went normal-ish, they were going back to normal. Do I harp on it? Do I tell him, let's think about him, let's look at the day camp video and let's try to find him, let's remember what he looked like, or do I just, let it go? And if we do that, is it a desensitizing type of a situation? Am I, taking away from his sensitivities?
So you're saying a lot in your question, and I'm going to try to address each of them quickly. First of all, it's just interesting that your question came after your question, because I find in every tragedy that I deal with, every situation that I deal with, that mostly everybody finds something to feel guilty about, children and adults. And guilt is a very normal reaction. And your guilt is coming from, a hashkafic perspective. Your child's guilt is coming from, I didn't get a chance to blah, 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 or I didn't invite him to pizza when I went with my friends 3 weeks ago, and that's why this happened, right? So first of all, guilt I look at from 3 different perspectives, and usually one of them works. Number one, guilt is a psychological defense mechanism. We need to be angry and blame somebody for this, right? And, some of us feel uncomfortable saying, Hashem, how, we're angry at you. So it's me, right? The easiest person to be angry and blame is ourselves, even children, okay? Number two, guilt comes from the Yetzer Hara. It's really the hashkafic perspective that we know this comes from Hashem, right? Like the Rabbi spoke so beautifully about. So it's like the Yetzer Hara saying, I could have, I would have, I should have. When ultimately we know, although it's confusing to understand, this is exactly the way HaKadosh Baruch Hu wanted it. And number three, guilt comes from a place of love. This was my friend. This was my neighbor. This was my classmate. I could have done the world to see them. Okay? So both for kids and for adults. The second thing that you touched upon is kids of all ages, they may fight it, but they need and they thrive on consistency, structure, routine, familiarity, safe place, right? So the fact that, your children went back to routine a little bit today, that's very, very therapeutic, extremely therapeutic, because so much of what they know in terms of structure and routine and safety and security, that's been shattered. So going back to school, even in the smallest bit, we know we come to school, and 9 o'clock we daven, and then we have chumash, and then we have recess, and then we have this, and there are my friends and my teachers who I know and are familiar to me. That alone is very therapeutic. So, you should know that about your children, that even if they're having a hard time, pushing them back into routine, and adults also, getting up and going to work and doing what we need to do, even if we're thinking about the tragedy during the day, but if we can get back into our routine, it's very, very helpful. And then finally, no, don't ignore it. I wouldn't bring it up ad nauseum, but definitely if your child is bringing up about how his friend had, midot and he remembers this, definitely, you got to get him into the conversation, Tell me stories about your friend. Tell me about the midah of smiling all the time, let's say, right? Let's say he says, I remember my friend, he smiled all the time. Tell me stories. How do you remember him doing that? Was it something that happened in camp? Was it something that happened in school? And even more so, I would help him use those memories to keep his friend with him even though he's not with him. So for example, just, a generic example, let's say his friend was somebody that smiled all the time, right? Even when he was having a hard time, he smiled. So it's not about smiling at every single person for the rest of your life, but it's about choosing one boy once a day that you otherwise wouldn't have smiled at. Say, I don't know his name, I'm sorry. This is for you. This is my way of keeping you with me, even though you're not with me. And even something small as, let's say we're talking about a young boy, right? That let's say his friend, that perished, was great at playing ball. You know what? When you go out at recess tomorrow and you have a great game of baseball, you're with me. I'm playing with you. You're here with me. I'm playing for you. So it's these small ways that we can help our children really hold on to their friends, and it really also helps in their mourning process because they're doing something. They're taking those passions and those feelings and their emotions and they're channeling it into an action, into something that they can do to express themselves, because most little kids aren't going to come to you and say, Mommy, I'm really stressed about what happened. It's going to come out in other ways. So we're helping them think out of the box and express themselves, in alternate modes of expression.
I did not discuss the whole thing with my kids. None of my kids are in the same school or anything. Is that wrong? Not to discuss it at all? Is it going to come to that?
Do they know what happened?
I don't know. I didn't discuss it at home at all.
Okay, so I will tell you a rule. I don't have a lot of rules in this work that I do. But one rule that I do have and I do feel strongly about is that if there's something out there that there's even a small possibility that your kids are going to hear on the school bus, in the playground at recess, online at the pizza store, then I would much rather them hear it from you in a safe, secure, loving way, in a way that you can gauge their reactions and answer any questions. And if you don't feel comfortable doing it, to have someone help you do it. But it is worse than hearing it, again, on the school bus from a kid that's 3 years older than them, and you don't know how it's going to be told, and you don't know how your child is going to react. If you feel 1,000% sure that you can keep your child in a bubble, and he's not going to hear it from any other source.
I know it's not going to happen. I'm not, but, how are you going to say something like, oh, they had a fire with the menorah, and something, you bring something so festive that we do a lot on Hanukkah for the kids, that we're going to mention this with such a big tragedy.
So it is very hard. I'm not
They're going to hear what you're
right.
saying.
So I'm not going to disagree. It's very, very hard. It's, the hardest thing to have to tell our children. But with children, it's really just honesty. There's really no sugarcoating it. You're telling them slowly, not stretched out over hours, but with even dramatic pauses, just to get their brains to start to absorb. And you're going to tell them whatever facts that they may hear elsewhere. And you're going to validate, like the doctor and the rabbi have been saying all night, just to validate that this is something very hard that mommy has to tell you. And it is difficult to understand. And this is something we're all going through together, just a lot of love and reassurance and support. You're going to remind them of the safety skills in your house, what you would do if, God forbid, there was a fire. That actually helps them, empowers them, it makes them, feel safer. But unfortunately, look, as a mother, I wish, I could keep my kids in a bubble. If you know how to do that, please let me know. But I do feel strongly that if there is news out there that they're going to hear, ideally they really need to hear it from you.